Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rizvan Jawad Ruhan. Today I am going to give a presentation on the topic compile time polymorphism versus runtime polymorphism. Now, what is polymorphism? Polymorphism is a single well-defined interface used to access a number of different but related actions. One interface, multiple methods. Polymorphism simplifies complex systems. Polymorphism is of two types, compile time polymorphism and runtime polymorphism. Compile time polymorphism uses static or early binding, whereas runtime polymorphism uses dynamic or late binding. Here we are comparing the different features of static binding and dynamic binding. Static binding refers to the events that can be known at compile time. The example of this is normal overloaded functions, non-virtual member functions, and friend functions. When these functions are compiled, all the address information necessary to call them is known at compile time. So statically bound function call is very efficient, but it lacks the flexibility which we find in dynamic binding. Dynamic binding refers to the events that must occur at runtime. When a late bound function is called, the address of that function to be called is not known until the program runs. The example of this is virtual functions accessed via a base class pointer or reference. The function has to be virtual and it has to be accessed through a base class pointer or reference. Otherwise, it will not be a late bound function call. Late bound function call is less efficient because there is more overhead associated with the function call. But it is flexible at runtime. As there is potential efficiency trade-offs, the programmer must decide whether to use static binding or dynamic binding. Now, a base class pointer, we can use a base class pointer to point to any derived class of that base class. Here we have an example where a base class pointer is being allocated memory of a derived class object. We can access the member functions which are inherited by the derived class through a base class pointer. We can also access pure or non-pure virtual functions overridden by the derived classes through a base class pointer, which refers to dynamic binding. Here we have an example code of compile type polymorphism in C++. Here we have a base class which is named job position, and we have a function here with no actual body. Again, we have two derived classes which inherits the base class. In both of these classes, the function in the base class is being overridden. In main, we are declaring two objects of the derived class d1 and d2. We are calling the function through these objects, which is pretty straightforward. Here all the function calls are statically bound, hence this is an example of compile time polymorphism. The program already knows when it is compiled which function is going to be called. Here we have an example code of runtime polymorphism in C++. Again, we have a base class, but this time the function is a pure virtual function with no body. So the base class is an abstract class and we cannot declare an object of this class. Again, we have two derived classes which inherits the base class, and again the function in both of these classes override the function in base class. In main, we declare two objects of the derived classes d1 and d2, and we have also a base class pointer. We take an input from the user. If the input is 1, then base class pointer points to d1. Again, if the input is 2, then the base class pointer points to d2. Through this base class pointer, we call the function. Now, which function is going to be called depends on the input. The program must determine at runtime what type of object is being pointed to, then select which version of the overridden function to execute. So this is the difference between runtime and compile time polymorphism. Here the function is called through a base class pointer, i.e. it is dynamically bound. So this is an example of runtime polymorphism. I hope I cleared all the confusions between these two types of polymorphism, and that is the end. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.